great to see you all. What a beautiful day. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Bruce Bean. I'm a longtime childhood friend of Mitch's from first grade on up till recently, but still friends with Mitch. Anyway, we're here to celebrate. Pick an adjective. Amazing, the astounding, the awesome, the magnificent, wonderful life of Mitch Carlson. Yes, absolutely. More adjectives. Okay, we're going to cover a lot of territory in the next hour. We're going to try and get through this in an hour's time. So first we're going to have the UN folks talk to us. Tom and Andy and Rex are going to come up first. Then the Boulder crew, the Boulder friends are going to come up. So Dee and then two Bruces. Beth is going to talk. And then Mark via Laura is going to speak to us about the Boulder years. And finally, most importantly, the family, Sarah and Martha, are going to talk about the Carlson family's cherished thoughts about Mitch. So buckle up, fasten your seatbelts, get your handkerchief out or your bandana out, because we're going to have a lot of laughter, a lot of tears, and a lot of tenderness. So let's start. The amazing, wonderful stories of Mitch Carlson are to begin. Tom?
My name is Tom Ferguson, and I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. I first met Mitch in the fall of 1982. I had recently arrived in Bangkok to work for the refugee section of the American Embassy and was escorting New York Congressman Stephen Solars on a visit to the south of Thailand. Mitch was with the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. Solars was determined that something be done about the appalling pirate attacks on Vietnamese boat refugees crossing the Gulf of Thailand, and Mitch briefed him on the efforts of UNHCR and the Thai government to rein them in. Those efforts were notably ineffective, a fact not lost on Congressman Solars, a smart man not known to suffer fools gladly. Fortunately, Mitch was no fool. I left that meeting impressed by his ability to credibly explain the complexities involved to an impatient and notoriously prickly congressman. In his later role as field director of the United Nations Border Relief Operation, my respect for his crisis management abilities continued to grow. And what began as a valuable working contact for me soon became one of my closest friends. Standing here now, thinking back to those times, it is hard to believe that 40 years have passed. Mitch got into the humanitarian assistance business at a time of global turmoil. Invading armies were on the march in Cambodia and Afghanistan. Millions of refugees were on the move. Radical Islam was bursting out of Iran, and heightened Cold War tensions were fueling local conflicts and massive civilian suffering in a number of flashpoints. Cambodia was one. Mitch's job was easy to describe. As a result of Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia, hundreds of thousands of people fled to the border with Thailand in search of food and refuge from the chaos following the invasion. Mitch's job was to coordinate the international provision of food and other aid to those people located in makeshift camps at the border. But the environment in which he carried out his job was wildly out of his control. The camps were deeply involved with different factions of an armed resistance to the occupying Vietnamese army. They were run by local strongmen with an avid interest in smuggling, and the whole area was flooded with military weapons and rife with unexploded landmines. Not to mention his task of persuading dozens of non-governmental organizations to cooperate instead of compete often made herding cats look easy. I have no clue where Mitch acquired the skills he brought to this situation, but they were ideally suited for the environment he faced there and in dozens of similar jobs he signed up for in later years. His approach was pragmatic and open to doing whatever worked best. He genuinely liked and took an interest in other people, whether his staff or his clients, and exhibited none of the arrogance that often comes with bureaucratic rank. He prepared well for emergencies, was unflappable in a crisis, and his mild, rational approach to problems had a calming effect on others. Combined with his flexibility and resourcefulness, these characteristics also made Mitch an ideal traveling companion, and we traveled through much of the world in the years after his Cambodia work. He was easygoing and comfortable to be with. He was a man in constant motion for most of his life, a man whose career was devoted to helping the desperate victims of disasters, both natural and man-made. I can think of no higher praise than to say that he was a kind man and a good man whose life made a real difference to the world he was born into. I felt privileged to be his friend for 40 years, and I count myself among those many whose lives have been enriched by his. May you rest in peace, Mitch. You've more than earned it.
My name is Andrew Pendleton, or Andy Pendleton. Should I get closer for the way? I got a big mouth anyway. MLC, as we called him, Mitch Carlson, was my boss for over a decade. I'm thinking that perhaps today we have the opportunity to learn something that we do not yet know. For those of us who worked under Mitch's supervision, and for those of you who grew up with Mitch and Mitch's family. I first met Mitch at a beach refugee camp called Beirut. I promised myself I wasn't going to get up here and start boo-hooing, and about ready to right now. The beach refugee camp at Beirut, I remember the first day I ever saw Mitch. A couple of Frenchmen were running ahead and they were saying, "Have you met the new guy? He can speak fluent French. He can even speak French so well we think he's a Frenchman." I said, "Well, who is this guy? Come on, isn't that exaggeration?" They said, "No exaggeration. And he can speak English that we can understand." Okay. I said, "Who is this guy? Who is this guy, Mitch Carlson?" I didn't really know him. I saw him. Instantly friendly, instantly popular. About a year later, I was transferred with the closure of my route to Gamput. There, Mitch was the UN High Commissioner for Refugees field officer. And there we got to know each other very well. When the Khmer Rouge took power of the food distribution, from inside and outside, ciphering off what they could and sending it to the fighting men over the border, Mitch and I went shoulder to shoulder as we did for 10 years. We took it away from them. Mitch allowed me to build a family distribution center, and we harnessed a family book system, and we got the food to the people that needed it. And we knocked the Khmer Rouge out of the lineup. Before I get out of pace, I just want to say something. Isn't it a great feeling to be surrounded by so many people who love Mitch? Whatever has transpired up until this point, I'm trying my best not to hang on to grief, because that's not what Mitch would want. And we know that. And so it's not, he's no longer here, that I want to embrace. It's that he was. And when he was awesome. Let me continue. I hope I'm not boring you. Bruce, you can set me down. The present outpouring coming out of the refugees and people in Thailand and Cambodia is incredible. People are in a state of shock. The popularity of this man is overwhelming. You just wouldn't believe it. When he was here, people remember him like no one else. About 8 months after I joined Umbro, the field director asked me, he said, "Do you know a guy named Mitch Carlson?" I said, "I do." He said, he's applied for a field coordinator's position with Umbro. What do you think? I said 5 words: we need him, get him. Well, we got him, and Mitch took over the north and southern borders of the Thai-Kampuchean border. During the span of the 84-85 dry season Vietnamese offensive on the camps, they knocked all camps inside Thailand. 3 divisions of crack Vietnamese troops hit the camps with awesome firepower. Mitch was in the middle of it. He traveled from the north to the south like a rocket, 300 kilometers, trying to cover both areas. It's amazing. I'm not going to tell a lot of war stories. I think it's important to cover some of this stuff. In a place called Nam Yuen, the Vietnamese pushed 43,000 people over a minefield. Mitch was there with Dewey and Sacron and all those there. All his team were there on the other side. We can only imagine, without getting into the details, the horrific things that he saw that day with this population running over a minefield. But he was there. He had the ambulances lined up. His team was ready to go. I talked about Umbro and all the camps that were evacuated. They were evacuated not with us sitting on the fence, but with people like Mitch leading the charge. We're talking about leading these people under a blanket of artillery shell fire to safe haven in Thailand. Mitch became overnight an incredible icon on the border. Maybe we can briefly go back to the year 1979. Few people in America, despite the Vietnam War, had elbowed its way in Cambodia and Thailand, had bases all over it. And it's just the whole thing was awash. But if you ask somebody, can you find Thailand, Cambodia, Laos on the map of the world? Most Americans couldn't. But when pictures of famine-stricken Cambodian children, Vietnamese boat people, bodies washed up on shore, and Lao and Hmong people seeking refuge with the collapse of regime after regime, hundreds of volunteers around the world, they raised their hand and joined the fold. Mitch was one of them. I'm trying to move along. After the 84-85 dry season offensive, I was polarized, shell-shocked. I went home. Mitch stayed, and he was promoted. Mitch was promoted to the field coordinator of United Nations Border Relief Operation. He would take it to new heights. He would take Umbro to the reputation of being a real trailblazer in the UN, the real first starter in security and protection and camp management and sanitation and security. He took it to incredible heights. He put booklets together. He made us put booklets together. So these were living documents. I know the UN pretty well after 34 years of active service. And I can tell you they're not exactly running around recognizing Umbro as the #1 trailblazer because they took all of our stuff and used it. That's okay, because that's what Mitch wanted anyway. So, on the border in Thai, they say, "Huna, Umbro." And at first there was Julian Lefebvre, a French English guy, and it's Huna, you Umbro, Kun Julien. And then after him became John J. Moore, and it was Huna, you Umbro, Kun John. And then after that came Mitch. Huna, you Umbro, Kun Mitch. But Mitch served in that position 3 times longer than anyone else. And his name became synonymous with Huna, you Umbro. Sounds a bit cliche-ish, but like the taipan, Mitch was Huna, you Umbro. The following year, the Paris Peace Accords brought 265,000 Cambodians repatriated back to Cambodia. I'll be honest, there are people in the UN that knew if Mitch was still there, they might have a difficult time because UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, wanted to take complete control of Umbro. So Mitch was transferred to Cox's Bazar, where he set up the refugee camps for the Rohingyas. Everyone was mad, And all the embassies crashed on the UN and said, what? But it was too late. He was already headed to Cox's Bazar. Lo and behold, opened my eyes in Bat Nabong, Cambodia, and there he was. Mitch was appointed area coordinator for Bat Nabong. I was head of sub-office region for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and it gave us an opportunity to join forces again. Mitch and I recreated UMBRO in Cambodia. After the United Nations Transitional Authority of Cambodia left with their 23,000 peacekeepers, it collapsed. Mitch and I were responsible for the second largest town in Cambodia, and immediately they selected Mitch as head of security. And immediately, Mitch selected me as his deputy. Within a year and a half, the Khmer Rouge, they began to attack the Khmer Rouge, and the Khmer Rouge began to attack back. And they just couldn't stand up. And they collapsed and came up Highway 10, which was a main tributary into Bat Nabong. And I'll never forget that day. It was 5:30 in the morning. Mitch and I met on what's called the Cement Bridge in Bat Nabong. And I said, Mitchell, Khmer Rouge are up Highway 10. They're already on Phnom Som Bo. On Phnom Som Bo, they got their 105 artillery pieces. They can hit Bat Nabong. He said, I know. He said, where else? And I said, they're coming in from Suai Tan Kao. He said, I know, they're coming in from the lake too, and Passat. And I said, well, we're surrounded. He said, we got to make a move. As we talked, the vice governor and every sub-ministry and every government official went right past us out of town. Pretty good indicator. And then every soldier that was fighting the Khmer Rouge came into the market, sold their guns and sold their uniforms, and split. Bat Nabong, the second largest city in Cambodia, was left naked. The Khmer Rouge were surrounding the town. I was late to a meeting. Mitch sent me out to the 5th Regional Command. The commander said, I don't know whether to point our guns this way or to point our guns that way. I said, that's it. And I went and told Mitch. He said, that's it. And the meeting broke there, and I'll never will forget the way that Mitch did it. He walked in like this, and he looked at them and he said, Bing, here a needle drop. I got your attention. And he said, if we're going to evacuate this town, we're going to do it together. So I want to see a show of hands. I love that style. We call it the MLC style. It's called, let's do it together. Their hands shut up like that. And Mitch looked at me and he said, Andy, let's begin the evacuation process. That's it. And I said, well, Mitch, I got 100,000 internally displaced people coming up Highway 10. I got to go there. And he said, okay, just go. And so Mitch single-handedly handled the evacuation of 289 UN workers, charity workers, and their children overland and in 2 fixed-wing aircraft in 5 hours. They were gone. When the dust had settled, things were quiet. Mitch was exhausted. I was exhausted. I met him in the middle of town. And he said, let's hunker down. I had 4 sticks of flares in my back pocket. And Mitch and I prepared to lay those sticks around for the French to come in low altitude and pick us up and evacuate us. We hunkered down. We stayed in place. We made everyone leave except for a couple of hard-headed Frenchmen. They wouldn't move. And lo and behold, there's a story that no one knows about a division of crack Vietnamese troops landed in Bat Nabong and pushed the Khmer Rouge back just in time. I'm running out of time, and I'd like to end by speaking a little Thai. You know, Mitch's French was impeccable, and his Thai was the best of all of us. Those language skills were exclusively important. Mitch made his way to the elite French speakers, the head of the Democratic Kampuchea, the Khmer Rouge. Mitch drove a wedge between the population of the Khmer Rouge and their leadership. And once they returned to Cambodia, they flew like little birds. It worked. I'd like to close. ขอบคุณพระเจ้า ขอบคุณหลายๆคนมาร่วมกันเมื่อเป็นสามัคคีวันนี้เราจิบใจ เจ็บใจเรื่องคุณมิชมรณภาพแล้วยังไม่ลืมเลย ไม่ลืมขอบคุณมากหัวหน้า UN bro thank you
Good one, Andy. My name is Rex Dufour, and I'll be a little bit shorter. But if you'll indulge me for 4 minutes, I'll say my piece, and then I have a short piece from Jamie Micklejohn, and then a bit longer piece from Tony Banbury, both of whom were really good friends of Mitch. So my name is Rex Dufour. I worked with Mitch and Unbro for 3 years along the border, 1987 to 1990. And Mitch's passing is a loss for all of us who knew him. And you can hear from Andy and others what a loss that'll be. Mitch was a kind and generous soul. It's clear from all the messages from around the planet that Mitch was well-liked and had real and positive impacts on those he worked with and those he worked for. In his work with Unbro, Mitch oversaw dozens of folks from many different countries. And I worked with a lot of these folks, and it was a real cast of characters, I'll tell you that. They had a wide range of personalities and duties, all working to provide safe living conditions to hundreds of thousands of Khmer displaced persons. He managed it all with grace and humor, good humor, despite rocket and artillery attacks on the camps and various border villages and various crises that happened on a daily or weekly basis. And I met Mitch for the first time on the border in Irania Patet in 1987. He'd been working on the border for years. I was fresh from Peace Corps and hired to manage something called the Affected Thai Village program. And I remember Mitch being very supportive of some crazy ideas I had to help the villages and schools along the Thai side of the border. Some of them got us and the UN in trouble because we kind of crossed the Bangkok-based military, which was in charge of the border. But it was no understatement to say that because of his personality and character, the refugee relief operation ran more smoothly and set an example for future refugee relief operations. And he had a direct impact on hundreds of thousands of lives. And it's telling, I think, after 25 and 30 years, a small group of Unbro and border folks were still getting together with Mitch to celebrate our friendships. Sorry. So Jamie Micklejohn, one of the border friends who happens to live out in the Delta, has this remembrance. I told Mitch that I'm no poet, just a celebration of two friends of 40 years, two people with wanderlust and with the same mission in life, to help others. Mitch, you did it best. We are a couple of Colorado brothers. Love you, friend. And that's from Jamie. And I would add that we will all miss you, Mitch. And we're thankful that our lives were enriched. And I'd like to say a few paragraphs from Tony Banbury, who was a close friend of Mitch as well. And this is a note from Tony. I met Mitch in 1988 and last saw him earlier this year. Over 34 years, we had an amazing array of professional experiences together, and more importantly, just really great times. When I showed up on the Thai-Cambodian border in 1988, eager for a job, Mitch demonstrated qualities that I got to know well over the many ensuing years: friendliness, kindness, and openness. Mitch was the most non-judgmental person I have ever met. I never heard him raise his voice, have a cross word with anyone, or even speak unkindly to anyone. He seems to have been born without the gene that enables anger. Mitch's work directly or indirectly helped hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people. Hardly any of them met Mitch or knew his name. But Mitch was in it for all the right reasons. He genuinely wanted to help, and help he did. Tony continues, as inspiring as Mitch's work was to me and to so many others, his friendship was what I treasured most. From the time we met, Mitch has been one of my closest friends. So many good times shared over spicy Thai meals on the streets of so many towns and cities around the world. No matter the place or the year, time spent with Mitch was always fun, enjoyable, never heavy, never dull. And Mitch never imposed or even requested, but always gave. He had a great sense of humor, a wry and informed wit. Mitch was good and kind and fun, and through and through. As a person who dedicated his life to helping others, as a friend and as a human being, Mitch will always be a hero of mine. So, thank you, Tony.
Well, we're going to shift gears a little bit. Thank you. Unbelievable stories about Mitch and the United Nations. I never knew all of that. He never said a thing. So my stories of Mitch are going to revolve around 3 trees. A little different. So imagine for a minute being back in 4th grade at Mapleton Elementary School. Those of you that know, it was a fantastic school to grow up with. And at Mapleton, during the school year, or during the school day, you could actually walk home for lunch. Imagine that today, walking home for lunch. What a great, amazing world it was. Boulder, Colorado. So one day, Mitch was walking home for lunch, and he got to 6th and Mapleton. And those that are familiar with that corner know there's a bus stop there, a bus bench. And Mitch climbed up on the back of the bus bench, and he decided to jump for the tree next door. So he lunged and jumped very high, missed the branch, came back down on both his arms. Both wrists were broken. An ambulance was called, and Mitch was rushed to the hospital. And the next day, Mitch, being Mitch, showed up at 4th grade with 2 gigantic casts on his arm. And just recently, I learned from Martha that she had to occasionally help him undo his pants and help him pee. Thank you, Martha, for your service. Very, very good. So Mitch soldiered through this particular 4th grade with these particular casts on his arm, but being Mitch, as we all know, never stopped to smile or complain, or he always was smiling and never complaining. So he kept going and was fine through it all. Never deterred. So, tree number 2. At the end of 4th grade, a small maple tree was planted just outside of the 4th grade windows. Some of you may or may not remember this. For our class, this was Mrs. Klinke's class for 4th grade. And Mrs. Klinke was retiring after 50 years of serving in that particular class. She had taught some of our parents. So we were honored. But for me, that tree still stands some 60 years later. If you drive by Mapleton School now, that tree is still there. It's at the corner of 9th. You know, there's a little stone drinking fountain there, so this maple tree sits next to that. It's high above the school now. And for me, that particular tree symbolizes Mitch Carlson's optimism. His ability to reach across the world, to live an amazing life of service, to give shade to all of those that he has served. His ability to reach the sky in the most difficult times. So, tree number 3. This tree, maybe tomorrow, maybe in the future, but it's a tree that you might see out there. A tree, a magnificent tree, or maybe it's a small sapling just outside your window. And so I want you to just take a moment when you see that tree, when you're standing in the shade of the tree, and think of Mitch. And say to yourself, in Mitch's honor, what could I do today to make the world a little better place? Thank you.
Hi, these are tough acts to follow, and I've invited 2 of my cohorts. We've known each other since 7th grade. They knew each other before that, I'm sure. But my name is Dee Perry. I'm formerly Dee Dee Engdahl. This is Rita Dart, formerly Rita Lundeen. And this, of course, the infamous Beth Giesemann, now Beth Palmer. You'll hear. So the 3 of us got together and we talked about some of our memories with Mitch. And we decided to write this letter to Mitch. Mitch, you left us too soon. But it is easy for us to affirm you lived more life than most anyone after a mere 70 years on this earth. Many of us here today can't even imagine all the amazing, diverse people you positively impacted while experiencing harsh realities of this world. You were always putting others first, there to care for the displaced. We can only hope that these harsh realities were somewhat offset by the beauty in the world you experienced. We are reading this letter to you, Mitch, with hopes that somehow the energy you created while on this earth can carry our words to your spirit. Mitch, you were always a social organizer, whether it be sharing time at the family cabin, hitting the hills for all-day hikes, spending a day or 2 on the slopes, attending concerts at Chautauqua and Red Rocks, or planning fun antics that sometimes nearly got us into trouble. Many of our most memorable reflections come from days spent together at the cabin. At one such weekend, one of your buddies from grad school brought some very special brownies as his contribution to the potluck. Let me assure you, no one was able to hike a straight line the rest of that day, and most of us weren't even coherent. Another example of our antics with you transpired after a wedding reception many of us attended at Boulder Country Club. It was a hot summer night, and we needed to cool off a bit, so we snuck out to the pool for a few dips. We're not naming names, and we were not skinny dipping. Fortunately for us, when a nearby neighbor notified the police about a ruckus at the pool, we were not arrested, but were summarily escorted off the property, party clothes in hand. On another occasion, after one of our high school reunions, apparently there was a pool party for a select group of Mitch's friends, your friends, Mitchell. Rita and I were not there. Rumor has it that at this pool party, everyone was skinny dipping. Really. Mitchell, as I told you during one of the last visits I had with you, you were always the leader, exploring the world and trying new adventures. And you're at it again. Only this time, you're leading the way on the most mysterious journey any of us will ever experience. We're all going to join you someday. But again, you took the charge to lead the way. And we thank you for that. But we wish you had waited at least another decade before heading off on this adventure. Mitch, we believe you were blessed many times over by the many Buddhists you came to know during your travels. We hope those blessings are carrying you forward as you explore your new path. Mitchell, you will be with us for the rest of our lives in our memories. Thank you for leading the way. And now Beth has a few more things to say about budgets.
I considered my friendship to be a very great gift. His unassuming, self-deprecating, non-judgmental nature was a perfect answer for forging a non-threatening friendship with the insecure, self-conscious adolescent me, starting in high school. Friendship of more than 5 decades that we can attest to. And particularly after hearing all of his escapades at the UN, I have to say, I have a little bit of information about his adult working life that not so many people know about. I had been working seasonally at Budge's Resort, a hunting and fishing resort in the Flat Tops wilderness area, and I've been working there since 1971. When Mitch graduated from Lewis and Clark in 1974, he called me up and said, "It's time to cowboy up, Bethy. Can I have a job?" I was never quite sure what his parents made of that decision. He wasn't quite using a college degree. Perhaps their fears were offset by the less than $300 a month he made. Room and board were included, and he made good use of the board. And he was certain that it was going to be more fun than his high school job of roofing houses. Always game to learn something new, he took on his role as wrangler, hunting and fishing guide, and ranch hound with gusto. He bought himself a cowboy hat, boots, pearl snap shirts. He tried chewing tobacco. He rode, packed, wrangled horses. He liked hanging out at the corral. He loved to learn fishing. He'd fish, and he'd fish, and he'd fish, never perfecting the sport. I once asked Mitch to hold down the fort for a few days. I needed to be gone. No guests were going to be there. He was horrified at the prospect. "Bethy, I don't want to be in charge." Ironically, in a few short years, he was in charge of a rather large group of people in refugee camps. True to form, he was wonderful to work with. He was wonderful with the guests, and we had incredible experiences, completely solidified our friendship. He became part of my family. Thank you. And what fun we had. So on that, I'd sing, "Cowboy up, happy trails, and all the best."
Hello, everyone. My name is Bruce Walker. I was blessed to be friends with Mitch for nearly 6 decades. I got to know Mitch the first day of junior high school at Casey Junior High. Even then, Mitch really looked the epitome of the all-American boy. Carefully parted hair, solid colored shirts, matching socks, pants that were a little too high, Basswegian penny loafers. Nobody carried it better than Mitch, but we all tried. A few days ago, I pulled out the yearbooks from Casey just to recollect a little bit, and it was really amazing. Mitch was everywhere. Student council, head boy, Spanish club, Latin club executive, yearbook counsel, always the charismatic, humble leader. And like everybody else, I became good friends with Mitch. Mitch was just this incredibly indiscriminately friendly and genuinely friendly guy. And I don't think he ever had an enemy. One of my favorite remembrances of Mitch is when we convinced our parents to let us take a speed reading course. And this course promised that we were going to be able to read so fast that the only thing that would slow us down was how fast we could turn the pages. And so one of the sessions actually was teaching us how to turn pages. At the end of it, we both read Steinbeck's The Pearl in 11 minutes with zero comprehension. So it was a very forgettable course, but Mitch was not forgettable. And Mitch went on to really extraordinary things. He devoted his life to helping others, to making the world a better place, to going to refugee camps in some of the worst war-torn areas in the world. Mitch kept running to places that everybody else was running away from. And that included the Thai-Cambodian border that you heard about, where he's surrounded by armed camps and live landmines. It included Bosnia when it was at its most unstable time, and many other places. Our professional lives actually ended up intersecting in some of the work that he and I were doing in developing countries. And some of my colleagues were colleagues of Mitch's. In fact, where are you, Tim? Tim is one of them. And what I kept hearing from my friends was just that this incredible guy, Mitch Carlson, caring, calm, committed, highly effective in these really, fraught areas with high conflict. And he just had these unique interpersonal skills that allowed him to be effective in these charged conflict zones. That I think is just the uniqueness of Mitch. I don't know anybody else that really achieves at that level. And Mitch was also at the same time the person that was really holding our class together through these many decades since we graduated, class of 1970, Boulder High School. Mitch was always the communicator, the initiator. He was always emailing about some event he wanted to make sure that we didn't miss. He was always championing the summer Eben Fine concerts. He just kept us connected. So in the musical Hamilton, the final song has a refrain sung by Hamilton's widow. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? We don't get to tell our stories, others do. And going forward, that task falls to us, to continue to tell the story of our remarkable friend Mitch, and to try to do justice to the inspiring life that he led. I'll miss him. We'll all miss him. Thank you very much.
Sir, one more. My mistake.
I should have talked to you.
See you.
Thank you. My name is Laura Lyon, and I met Mitch in high school in our sophomore English class, and we had the opportunity to work on a special project together where I first experienced what I remember most was his dry sense of humor. He made working together really enjoyable. And then our lives wove in and out of each other's lives. Mostly when he came back to stateside for a little bit, we would go skiing. And I just think of him as a genuinely kind and compassionate man who was a truly accepting friend. And my purpose today isn't to pay tribute to Mitch, even though in my heart I am hearing everything from everyone. But I am standing in Mark Whaley's shoes today. And Mark is his longtime friend who could not be personally here today, but here he is. Mitch Carlson, a celebration of his life. Like all of us here today, I was devastated when Mitch gave me the news about his terminal condition. I had known Mitch since first grade, and he and I were very close friends throughout our high school years. I'm sorry that I couldn't attend his celebration of his life, and I wish I was here to personally convey my thoughts about our very good friend Mitch. "Hey, bud," was always Mitch's normal greeting to me and many of us. He loved life and was up for just about any adventure that we could imagine during our high school years. We were regular attendees at weekend woods deeds and house parties. Our typical cruising pattern was in my 1966 green VW Bug. Mitch's routine would be to get in the car, roll down his window, open up the sunroof, winter or summer, sit back with his foot on the dash and say, "I'm ready, let's go." Always full of mischief, he would find some prank. His favorite was pulling my keys out of the ignition while the car was still moving and throwing them out the window. Vehicle safety standards were a bit different in those days. Other memories include hanging out at his Netherland cabin, skiing on weekends and sometimes skipping school to go during the week, being dudes at Budge's, playing cards until the early morning during college breaks. Mitch was at my side when I picked up my wife Donna's engagement ring, and he traveled with me to the East Coast for our wedding. He was my best bud and a very loyal and honest friend. I don't recall that we ever argued, nor were we jealous of each other's accomplishments. He invited me into his family, and his parents were a major influence on shaping my values, raising a family, and the successes in my life. Crazy Mary, as Mitch would refer to his mother, was a second mom to me. Later in life, as our paths took us in different directions, we still stayed in touch with each other. I would really enjoy hearing about all his international experiences or visiting him when he was occasionally returned stateside. Mitch will always remain in my heart, and I will miss him dearly. He left us on earth too soon, but I can guarantee you he lived his life to the fullest and the way he wanted to live his life, helping people and making a difference. Thank you, Mark.
I'm Sarah Boyd, Mitch's second cousin. Our mothers were first cousins, and our grandparents were brother and sister, David and Martha Mitchell. When I learned that Mitch is not going to beat this battle, I decided to write him a goodbye letter, which is difficult to do, but I wanted to share it with you. Thank you, Martha, for asking me. Sunday, May 22nd. Dear Mitch, so much is going through my mind. Not sure I've ever written a goodbye letter, but here goes. I remember you coming to Tulsa with your folks and thinking what cute clothes you had. He was probably 2 or 3. Little hats and jackets and white shoes. Jo, that's my mother, made me wear brown lace-ups, so I was probably looking at everyone's shoes. Big, that was his grandmother, had lace-up energetics, which I loved too. Closer. Okay. One summer at the cabin, we played a lot of croquet, and I have a picture of you holding a mallet, just a toddler. And when the Stoffers, that's my folks, moved to Boulder in 1958, I was in the 9th grade at Baseline Junior High. We got together for meals, but I was probably too busy with new friends to be at 502 often. But your mom taught me how to iron properly, and I babysat sometimes too. And I would never see Mitch, but he wouldn't comment how I had damaged him. I took him to see Bambi, which must have scarred you for life, and I apologize. I watched the movie recently, and I was horrified at the content: fire, gunshots, the death of Filene. No wonder you remember the day better than I do. Another memory is the bathroom remodel and the personal alternative you found. The contractor had left a convenient hole before he finished the work. Your mom loved to tell the story. I don't think she was very mad, and we all thought it was funny. And of course, because of your family Christmas letter, I followed your career with great interest. Wished I could talk to you in person about living in another world. I spent 2 years in Iran and Switzerland as a privileged traveler, and it was so different from the real work that you did. I looked forward to a time when we could sit and talk about life in general, and that is why I always hoped that you and your pack would join us at the cabin each summer. When you retired to Denver and brought Dev to the cabin, the tenderness that you showed him, taking him to get his favorite barbecue, sweet corn and homegrown veggies from the family gardens, reminded me of taking care of my dad. Jack and Dev were both kind, bright, caring men. We have been blessed by having them raise us. I wish you a gentle death with Martha and Judy and John, Peter and Katie at hand. And if time allows and you want to visit, I hope it can be arranged. Godspeed, Mitch, second cousin in case Mary is listening. You are loved, and I will miss you in my world. Love, Sarah.
I want to clarify some stories first before I speak on behalf of the family. As most of you know, I'm Martha, Mitch's eldest sister. But Bruce was talking about the tree jumping over. Well, what they were doing, Bruce was with him, and they were being chased by a beehive that they had knocked over. Bruce made it to the limb. Mitch was afraid that he wouldn't make it, so he jumped really hard and just flew over. So
Mary never forgave me.
And Mom was washing the bathroom floor after the remodel and on her hands and knees. Actually, it wasn't after, because the hole was still there on the wall. And she just yelled at him, "Mitch, are you peeing in this hole?" Yeah. My grandmother gave me a silver 50-cent piece, and I don't know what we were doing, but both he and I put our pieces in that hole. Anyway. Yeah. It's my honor to speak on behalf of the family today. And we're blessed, really blessed, to have such a community whose lives were touched by him and who also touched his life in many ways. One of the things the last days taught us is how wide and vast his circles of friends really is. People visited him and came as far away as Thailand and as close as next door to honor him and to say goodbye. As he courageously faced his impending death, we learned about his remarkable life. One UN friend said that many of his colleagues felt like that they would walk across coals for Mitch. He clearly was an inspiring leader and colleague, a dear friend, and a beloved family member. Who knew a guy who so feared the Vietnam draft? And he really did. He just was beside himself that he was going to be drafted. He did not want to carry a gun. As a kid in elementary school, he walked a mile to avoid a bully, so he just didn't like aggression. But he ended up helping in war-torn areas and natural disasters for his whole career. Many people remarked that he seldom talked about his work unless asked. Some in the family feel that he did feel that this was to shield Mom and Dad from worrying. His niece Sarah said that his reticence to tell the many stories of his service was indicative of his personality, a humble man, in no way pushy about how others should pursue life. While going through his papers, I found a 9th grade typing assignment Mom saved and gave to him titled, "How I Rate Myself." It speaks of his character even as a teenager, so here's what he wrote, or typed. And he did have some typing mistakes, so it wasn't perfect. "I believe in being honest and telling the truth, most of the time. Though on occasions I'm a little hesitant in telling all of the truth. In case friends are involved and I'm asked to tell what happened, I try not to bring them in on the matter to keep them out of trouble. When I go somewhere, I sometimes just tell my parents a little about where I'm going and hope they will let me go. But lately I've found that it's better to tell them the whole truth because I feel they have more confidence in me." And then there was another paragraph on courtesy as a topic. He said, "I think it's really stressed upon the teenager because if he learns bad manners now, he will keep the same manners when he grows up. I enjoy being courteous to people, but every once in a while I run into some problems, like forgetting to introduce people to a friend," end quote. I don't think introductions were a problem for him. So, honesty and courtesy. At the end of Mitch's life, he displayed both by letting friends and family know that he would leave us soon. Too soon. Peter lost a big brother who was larger than life for him. As a wrangler at the Geisman Ranch, Peter saw him with cowboy hat, pliers on his belt, rugged boots, plus a beard and mustache. Things only Peter dreamed of since he was 8 years younger. When he left for the service in 1980, Peter loved hearing the stories that were too scary to share with Mom and Dad, and that happened while he bunked with Bub at the cabin. Peter built him a fly rod and gave him some waders and encouraged him to enjoy fly fishing. He was never very good, but he did enjoy it. And once Peter had to call out to him while he stood in the river. A juvenile moose wanted Mitch's spot in the river. It was a pretty close call. Anyway, Mitch was generous to the next generation, was curious to hear about their adventures, and often a willing participant. We all had a fondness for his genuine belly laugh and his compassionate interest in all things family. Katie said Mitch had no airs about him and was happy to share his knowledge and love of the outdoors or Thailand or anything with anyone, and easily engaged in conversation, much like his parents. Katie thought he should have been a DJ in retirement given his voice, and noted his modesty about his accomplishments. Judy says, "I think we have this backwards. Bub, which is what the family called him, should be here to see and hear how people feel about him. The time from March to June has been a blessing to all of us. I learned more about him and his experiences in the last 4 months than any other time. He took time to share with us. He was kind. He held his grandmother's leg when steady down the canyon after she fell and broke her hip. And Judy remembers that he was the oldest. As the oldest, he got the first lockbox. He didn't keep the combo very secret. We knew it, and we also knew what was in there. And let me tell you, it wasn't all cash." Mom didn't like it that he was trying to grow marijuana in her garden. Mitch said Mitch believed that his nieces and nephews should be fiscally responsible, and he believed in traveling to learn and grow. Her favorite thing about him was his conviction. He was firm in his beliefs. Once he had made up his mind about something, that was it. Whether it was his dislike of barking dogs, his love for the cabin, family, and friends, he felt strongly about things. She notes that he was not very well versed in interaction with infants. One night he was holding Theo, who fell asleep in his arms, and Bub just set him on the dining room table in front and was floored that Theo kept sleeping, lying on the table. He was so happy in that moment, and Nate, Sarah's husband, said that Mitch sparkled when in company with Theo, and I'd add with any young child. Theo, now 3, believes Bub's in his heaven house with angels and no dogs. Mitchell, his namesake, recalls some amusing things about his uncle. He always seemed to lack wrapping paper. We got gifts in plastic bags and boxes with the address on it. He would give detailed weather reports, wherever he was, whether we were interested or not. Mitchell noted that they once fed Cheetos to wild turkeys together, and he enjoyed listening to Harry Potter with Mitch. John, Mitch's brother-in-law, says that Mitch was happiest outdoors in the field and dedicated to the needful. Later in retirement, he found that volunteering at the two parks, Rocky Mountain and Winter Park, sustained that passion. He found great joy sitting on a porch watching birds and other critters. He took advantage of his volunteer experience to make friends with many who shared a dedication to keeping Colorado a great place to play. His life was a testament to the power of people to help each other enjoy the world with the hope that maybe its richness rubs off and makes us all better. I am the sister who, as a kid, would do anything to be in his company. I remember one time he and Jesse Holmes thought they could get rid of me by saying I couldn't swim with them unless I wore a boy's swimsuit and gave them a nickel. No problem. I stole the 5 cents from Mom, found his extra swimsuit. Done. Back in his company. Bub, you showed such courage to see your life ending. When the doctor said you had a 50-50 chance of living past 3 months, you faced dying head-on. I was blessed to have hosted you for the weeks of hospice. Anything to be in your company. Almost done. But I'm grouchy that you didn't take care of yourself and left us sooner than we wished. I believe each of us has a finite number of chapters in our book, whether short or long. Mitchell, Bub, yours was full of many chapters of service, adventure, and love of friends and family. I miss you. Happy trails. Maybe we will meet again somewhere over the rainbow.
Way up high, the
I've wanted a party. Let's raise a glass to him, enjoy each other. Time to play and share now. Thanks.